You seemed like you just weren't prepared for Mark, and Mark just kind of like steamrolled you in the debate. So can you tell me, like, did you prepare?
Oh, yeah. I
Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. So today, we have with us Dr. Dan Haifley. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you this
uh,
lovely morning?
doing great. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the channel. I had Mark Ward on last week, and I had a number of people say, "Hey, you should reach out to Dan and see if he'll come onto the channel." And so I did. So thank you to everybody who suggested that. And this is hopefully going to be a wonderful conversation. He's a very friendly guy. He's, as you've seen in the debate, very cordial, very brotherly, and hope to walk away from this discussion with a new friend. Dr. Dan Haifley, let me ask you just first and foremost, we'll get right into it. One of the major criticisms of watching you and Mark in the debate was this, and I was, I made a public declaration of this criticism is that you seemed unprepared. You seemed like you just weren't prepared for Mark, and Mark just kind of like steamrolled you in the debate. So can you tell me, like, did you prepare?
Oh, yeah. I don't want to tip my hand too much, but it was a debate technique, and yeah, I was prepared. Uh, Just to give you an idea, I was going into this. Are you a chess player?
I play chess from time to time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I like chess. One of the things with chess is sometimes you give up a pawn, or you give up a rook, or you give up a bishop, and you're going after the king, right?
Right.
So I demonstrated that that was what I was aiming at. I was aiming at the king, and there was a position that I wanted to expose, and I wanted to him to be able to articulate, and I wanted to do it friendly and kindly, but I
Sure.
also wanted people that listened to him to understand what his real position was.
Right.
And I think we did that in a soundbite. And I knew going into it that a debate, nobody's going to listen to a long, drawn out debate. There, and part of the challenge is to win the room as well. You have to win. You don't have to win the hearts and minds of the people listening to you
Right.
for them to be able to listen. So there was a lot of things that I said. I dropped, and guys are unpacking it and saying different things. It's fine. I dropped a lot of stuff. We only had 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And my goal was not really to answer everything he was saying. I mean, he's put 300 videos out, I
Right.
think, and there's no way to cover all that stuff. So what I was trying to do was basically say, look, A, this guy loves God. He's has a different opinion than us, but this is what he really thinks. And I was happy with the result. And a lot of people that I know of have told me the same. And I know there's other people that are not happy with the result.
Yeah.
And funny thing about that, most of the ones that are not happy with the result were people that didn't want me to do the debate. So they
Right.
didn't want me
Okay.
to do the
Okay.
debate, and they didn't like how it turned out. And my grandma would say they'd complain if you hung them with a new rope. So,
Right, right. So, okay, so in the debate, Mark referred back to his book that he hasn't yet published yet. So he sent you a
right,
pre-published copy, and I think it was
right.
another, was it 38 more false friends? Now
Something like that.
yeah, so I'm assuming you read the book.
I did. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and did you have an opportunity to use the information from that book in the debate somewhere? I didn't particularly see a reference back to his book and his
No,
false
no,
friends,
I
but
mentioned it because he'd asked me to do a review of it, and my name's going to be on the review, I think. I mean, I
oh, right on.
assume he's going to publish it with my, and my review was very, how do I say it? I said, I appreciate this work. I do not
Hmm.
agree with all of the conclusions. And he said he
Right,
was going to
right.
print that. I don't agree with everything he's saying. I don't agree with all of his, like the thing about study, for example. I think he's completely wrong about that. But hey, he's got an opinion. I've got an opinion. You've got an opinion. Everybody has a right to an opinion,
Sure.
and we need to be able to talk about this intellectually and have a conversation where we can all learn.
Agree. No, that's good. So let's talk about the thesis. So the thesis of the debate was interesting. So I'm on your side here actually with the answer to the thesis. So I'm a Byzantine guy, and so I really don't have any issues with the KJV for the most part, right?
Right.
I was kind of expecting that the debate was going to go in the direction of the textual question, right? The
Right.
TR, the Byzantine versus the critical text. But when I saw the thesis, I was a little disappointed. I was a little disappointed.
Right.
Um, where did the thesis come from? Was that Mark's idea, or did you
It,
guys collaborate on that?
no, it was his idea, and I'm okay with that. I think truth can stand scrutiny, and I wanted to talk to him at a point. I want to interact with him at whatever point he wanted to interact with me. That's where I was at with it. I'm not okay with all the nastiness, the name calling,
Hmm.
what I would call using the term raka, which the Bible tells us not to do,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
means empty-headed one. Those kinds of things, those kinds of attacks, personal attacks on Mark Ward's person. This is just off. That's just disgusting. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
when he said, "Look, I am not willing to talk about the text issue," I found out after I asked him. I talked to him about this quite a bit. Why aren't you? And I found out it's because he's tired of talking about the issue with people that don't really know what we're talking about.
Hmm.
And he told me that he didn't know me that well either. And so he wasn't sure how I was going to respond. He didn't know what I was going to do. He didn't know if I was going to be one thing behind closed doors and another thing on the platform.
Right.
And he said to me that he found I was the same guy, which is the highest compliment anyone could pay
That's
me.
good. That's
I
good.
want to be the same guy both places. I am who I am, and I believe what I believe, and I'm willing to be challenged. I'm willing to be corrected. But this is what I see from my research and my understanding. I said, look, no one's really talking about the readability issue. You've devoted 300 some videos to it. You've
Yeah.
devoted a bunch of your life to that. And on our side, nobody wants to talk about that. So, okay, you want to talk about that? I'm okay with talking about that. And I think that some of the points I made, I'm going to have to, we're going to unpack those things little by little. And right now, I'm a little disappointed with the
Hmm.
guys, what I would say more on my side of the aisle right now, because rather than rehoning their arguments and being more, careful with what they're saying, they're going off and saying things that are just indefensible. And
Right.
I think that's a mistake. Some folks are accusing me of attacking their Bible and wanting to change. No, I just think, either we're double inspiration or we're not.
Right.
Either if this is off topic just a little bit, but I'm
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
rambling a little
Sure.
bit, but I want to I want
Yeah.
to I want to say this if I can. Okay, so when you say the King James Version is the perfect word of God, okay, what do you mean when you say that?
Hmm.
I just want to know what you mean. And I'm asking that question. And there's guys that are saying, well, don't change any words. Okay, so in First Thessalonians 4, when it says, we will not prevent them who are asleep, can I change the word to precede when I'm teaching, or do I need to stick with prevent?
Hmm.
And do I have to spend 5 minutes every time explaining this is an old English word that's changed its meaning? Or can I just use the word precede? Or is it wrong to use, is it sin to use the word precede? And is that attacking the Bible when I use a clearer word? I don't know what everyone is saying. I don't understand what, and I'm trying to understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to the readability issue, I'm not saying it's not readable. I tried to make the point that culturally, country music refers to it, doesn't refer to the ASV or the RSV.
Right. Right.
Every one of the new versions use it as the standard. So I was trying to make the point that it is the standard of our language. It is the standard in our culture. It is the anchor that we have tied to academically and in every way. I mean,
Right.
President Trump just put out a Bible that was a King James Version Bible.
Yes.
Hello. I
Yeah.
mean, there you go, culturally. Jordan Peterson, in his study of Genesis and Exodus, uses the King James Bible.
Sure.
I mean, anyone that's academic that I know of that wants the accurate English translation always goes to the King James. And so to
Hmm.
say it's not readable, I think, and I told Mark this on our follow-up conversation, that he's extreme. Mark is challenging us with that saying that KJV opposition is extreme, and I would say that there are guys on the far whatever, right, left, whatever, on the far edges that are extreme. But
Right.
Mark is also extreme when he's saying it's completely unreadable because it's
Right.
very readable and we're reaching people for Christ with it.
Hmm.
But having said that, I'm willing to discuss and ask the questions because okay, so Tyndale was 1500s, right? 100
Yep.
years later we have the 1611. 100 years later we have the 1769,
Yep.
right? And then in 1881 they were supposed to update again and they went far afield, we know that. So
Right.
it's been probably 200 and some years since we've had an update. Is it worth looking at? Well, I think it's worth a
Hmm.
conversation. I think
Hmm.
it is. And so I was willing to discuss that and bring that into the conversation.
Now,
And I enjoyed that conversation.
are you aware of Brian Ross's work?
I'm not.
Oh,
Uh-uh.
dude, you need to be connected to him. He
Okay.
just recently wrote a book with a colleague of his called "The Myth of Verbatim Identicality." And so, when you were asking the question, well, what do you mean by the Bible is pure? Now, I'm not a King James Version onlyist, but I can recommend his work because it's excellent, and he
Right.
tackles that question in a way that I've not seen
I would
um,
love to see it. His name
elaborated
is, what is
before.
his name?
Brian Ross, Grace Life Bible Church, I believe, is his YouTube channel, and
And what's the name of his book?
it's called The Myth of Verbatim Identicality. And
Okay.
he holds to a view in which theoretically, the KJV could be updated. But
Right. And that's where I'm
yeah,
at. I'm not
yeah,
advocating. I'm saying I think we're intellectually dishonest if we don't say
Hmm.
theoretically it could be updated.
Right, right.
I'm not suggesting that we are ready or anywhere close to updating it. And
Mhm.
I made a comment at the end of the debate that's completely being glossed over that it could be 100 years, another 100 years before we really need to address it. But
Right.
arguably, can we say that Tyndale is a current translation? Can we say that the actual 1611
Hmm.
is worth, publishing and putting in our pews?
Right.
Um,
Or yeah, I would say no, right? Just because the spelling is
right,
all, yeah, yeah.
right. And so, is now the time? Well, I don't know that it is. I'm asking the questions though, and I think we're intellectually dishonest if we're not willing to even have that conversation.
Right.
And for guys to suddenly get on the board and say, wow, you're attacking my Bible. No, 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 I'm not.
Hmm.
No. I absolutely, and what I'm trying to help Mark see when he doesn't want to talk about the text, I'm trying to help him see, and we discussed it. Did you see our follow-up conversation? Our second?
I'm partway through it, so 2 hours is
Okay.
a long
Oh, it
discussion. So
is. It
I will
is.
get through it. Yeah, yeah,
I promise it is. But one of the things I was trying to show him was so he's saying the MEV is a TR based translation. I was showing him how the MEV follows the ESV and NIV in several places, which is
sure.
why I reject the MEV.
Hmm.
And he says, well, that's not a textual issue. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about the
Yeah,
translation then. If it's following the new Bibles and translating or changing the word, he said, well, that's because the word has changed the meaning. That's his argument, which is not
right,
true in every case.
right.
So,
So I
we're
have
getting
some.
into some of the details of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll deviate just a little bit because I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I use the New King James Version, and we have that our pew Bibles in the
Okay.
church, and I preach from it, I teach from it, and I'll read my devotions and stuff from the King James Version because I love the King James Version, right? So the biggest attack in the modern versions often comes to the New King James Version. David Daniels' book, The Bridge Bible. I've started reading that just because I'm curious what the other side is saying. And the issue, or what's often stated, is that we get a number of readings in the New King James Version come from the critical text. And I think TBS has an article where they show 6 examples where there is no Textus Receptus reading underlying the word. So 6 out of how many words? 180,000 words in the New Testament, something like that. 6 out of 180. Does that mean it's not a TR? That's one question. But then the other thing is most of the other differences seem to be translational. So the one of the issues that come up all the time is 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the preaching is to them that perish foolishness, but to us who are being saved versus us who are saved, often gets called a critical text reading. Now, the issue with that is the construction of the Greek participle underneath that could be translated that way. So it's not so much that it's a deviation
Well,
from the
I
Textus
disagree with you on
Receptus.
that. I
Mhm.
disagree with you on that point. Can I speak to
Sure.
that?
Yeah, go for it.
So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if your understanding of Greek, and please understand, I'm not being arrogant. People
Oh, sure. Go
misunderstand.
for it. Yep.
This is just my opinion, okay?
Hmm.
I get the tense, the Greek tense
Yep.
is the idea of, okay, so the salvation is a continual thing. So, in other words, you get saved at birth, but they're talking about an entire life experience.
Right.
That word say who are saved, that word saved there, that tense means um a life, for lack of a better term. The problem is when the NKJV translates that being saved.
Yeah, most modern
Okay,
translations
so
do.
the
Yeah.
ESV does too. Yeah, so academically and mechanically, I hope you can understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can say being saved and say, well, walk away and say, well, that's what the word, that's what it means, being saved. But
Sure.
being saved in English
Yep.
does not mean that. In other words,
Hmm.
that tense is not translatable. And so the King James translator said, are saved, which indicates half of the statement, which is the KJV translators, my understanding, understood the importance of making this statement
Hmm.
salvation is a done deal. And that matches the whole context of the Bible, which you're sealed with the Holy Spirit of
Yeah.
promise and so on. If you take our being saved in the current vernacular and current understanding, what you're going to come up with was salvation is not a done deal, signed, sealed, settled. It's
Yeah.
a process, which you could. Wesley even said this at one point in his idea. He said, I don't believe you can lose your salvation, but I think that if you get on a train from point A to point B, you can get off at any point you want to. And he,
Right.
he says, I think you can get off of your salvation train,
Hmm.
basically. And I think he's wrong on that. But I
Right.
mean, that's what that lends to. And I think that's now if you're an NK, a King James guy on an NKJV budget, you're gonna you're gonna
I like
um,
that.
you're gonna understand what I just explained. And
Yeah.
when you read "are being saved," you're gonna know in your mind. The King James says "are saved." This says "being saved." We're going to put those two concepts together, and I'm going to come up with what I believe about this. But
Yeah.
if you take the King James version out of the equation and how those translators translated that, then you end up with a salvation that is a process, which is what it means to the English speaking people. So, to the point, false friends, I would say that's a false friend interpretation. NKJV got it wrong. ESV got it
Right.
wrong. Yes, it's academically possible to say it that way, but it is not what that means.
Hmm. Yeah, so I want to bring it back because we could argue the grammar all day, and might even be a
Yeah.
good video at some
Well,
point.
sure.
I did that with Mark. We talked about it, but if we come back to the passage, and my point with the Textus Receptus and the critical text reading is because it can be translated that way. And it is a translation of the underlying Textus Receptus. I would think that it's wrong to call it a critical text reading. It may be a critical text translation, or it may be a translation of the TR that you don't agree with, but it's still a Textus Receptus
So
translation.
so that's what Mark's point is, and that's why he
Yeah.
doesn't want to talk about the text,
Yeah.
underlying text, because he's finding out that a lot of guys, all they have is English, and they say, this matches, and I confess that
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes I've done that. Okay, this matches the NIV, the ESV, so therefore it matches the
The
critical
critical text.
text,
So, yeah.
and they don't realize that that's not really the issue.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, to your point, I get it.
Yeah, and I think when we call it a critical text reading, we're actually misleading the conversation because we take it from a translational issue and make
I
it a
agree.
textual issue, and it's not. Yeah. So let me ask this: in light of our conversation, the previous point, which was can the KJV be updated? You suggest that theoretically it could. You don't know if we're there yet. Fair enough. Would you consider yourself a King James Version onlyist?
What does that mean
Yeah. Why
to
don't you
you?
define what because I think there's about 5 or 6 different King James Version positions that I've been able to articulate over the last 2 years or so. How would you define King James Version only? How would you define your position? I think that's probably a better way to ask it.
Okay. Um, wow. That's a it's a
Mhm.
bigger question than I think people realize. I so
It's fair to
I
say
try.
you're not a Ruckmanite.
Oh yeah, not even. I think Ruckman, and I'll just go out on a limb here. I think that what Ruckman did, this is my opinion, not the opinion of all my friends,
Sure.
but I think Ruckman caused more problems in this whole issue single-handedly than anyone else. And I believe that he has some heretical teachings
Yeah.
about, yet at the same time, I think he was a brilliant man. And I've read some of his stuff and been interested and fascinated by
Hmm.
some of his ideas. But at the same time, I think that he was what I would call a hyper dispensationalist, and that's a whole other thing. But excuse me.
Yeah.
Your question. Where is my position? So, I trust the authorized version. I think the authorized version was a unifying version. I think that Tyndale's version was a good version. I think that Rogers did a good job. I think Matthews did a good job. I think Bishops did a good job. I think Geneva, if you quote King James himself said that he thought that Geneva was a bad translation. And I think
Right.
in some cases it was. Um, I don't really trust the Geneva. Even though it's a TR based text, I don't trust it. And that was the Bible that came over on the Mayflower,
Hmm.
um, which was some of the founding,
Yeah. Yep.
founders of America used the Geneva. But I think that I absolutely trust the King James translators. When I look into the King James words, and anytime I come up with something where I would disagree with them, and then I get further into it, I'm like amazed at how good they were, and why they chose what they chose every single time. And I mentioned Lucifer, and that's a whole nother conversation.
Sure.
But every single time, if I would have been on the King James Bible translating committee and they showed me why they used the word Lucifer, I would have agreed with their choice at
Right.
that time. Because I think I get it. I get why they did it and why they connected it, but I also think Lucifer was a dynamic equivalent. I think
Right.
I wouldn't want to change it now because I think Lucifer is means, well, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's
But
a
but
cultural thing now, right?
yeah, yeah. I
Everybody
mean, everybody
understands
knows it's the
Lucifer.
devil, and I
Yeah.
think that's why they used the word Lucifer there, because that was a passage that was talking about a person that was an arch enemy of the devil, and everyone understood to be Lucifer. The problems of the name is what we're finding in the debate with the ESV and the NIV. They're saying, well, hey, this word means light bearer, so does Lucifer. So
Hmm.
what's the difference? And
Right.
again, they're missing the base point of that. But anyway, I trust the King James translators. I think yeah, they were Anglican, but academically, I think they did a good job. I think that, to quote Adam Clark, I don't have the quote exactly. I could
Hmm.
get it for you, but he said that the authorized version was a beautiful English translation, and also was a standard for translation, and
Hmm.
also became a standard for the English language itself.
That's
And
right.
I
That's
and
right.
I think that's true, and I agree with that. Um, when if I were to see an update, one of the reasons I'm against all the update attempts that have been so far is
Mm.
I think they've been random groups of people that have said, "Well, I have this agenda. And so I want to get this done. I want to
Right.
do it my way. And so it's never, none of those projects have ever really progressed to the level of the King James.
Hmm.
And the only thing I would be for is actually an update of the King James with the same attitude and level of expertise that
Hmm.
was done in 1769. In other
Right.
words, there was no more than 130, I think, words changed from 1611. And I think an update, not a new translation, is what would be necessary. I don't know if that explains my position. I hate it when they give me titles and they say, well, you're
Yeah,
King
yeah.
James preferred, or you're
Sure,
King James
sure.
this or that, because I don't know what that means. If I say
Hmm.
I'm King James preferred, well, what am I lining up with? I don't really know.
Right.
So I know what I believe, that the King James translators were accurate and faithful, and that the King James version has stood the test of time. I don't think there's any translation that's come close to it, but it is a translation of the
Hmm.
inspired scriptures. I don't believe in double inspiration. I don't think that every word choice is perfect. I think every word choice was accurate and faithful.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Thank you for that.